The Day the Earth Stood Still. This is episode 23.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casco, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
Welcome to 70s Trek. This week we talk about a movie made in the 1950s that influenced the show made in the 1960s, and we talk about it in the 20-teens. I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casco. That's right. This week we talk about the movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still. It was one of Gene's favorites and influenced his approach to Star Trek.
Yeah, but before we talk about this classic sci-fi film, let's let listeners know how they can reach us. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/70strek. And we would love to hear your thoughts or questions about Star Trek in the 1970s, or about this show, or anything else that might be on your mind.
Ooh, I got lots on my mind. Let me go there. So you could also find the show on iTunes. Just have to search for 70s Trek in the podcast area. And to help this show be found easier, we sure hope that you'll give it a rating or a review.
The Day the Earth Stood Still remains a classic sci-fi movie to this day. Kelly, why don't you start us off and tell us what that film is about?
Sure. All right. So the plot is a flying saucer. It's flying around the Earth. It lands in Washington, D.C. This humanoid emerges. His name's Klaatu. And then this big, nasty robot comes out named Gort. As Klaatu is producing something to give to the people of Earth, this silly soldier, who's a little nervous, bravely so, shoots the device and Klaatu.
It's funny, too, because I have in my notes the quote, "We have come to visit you in peace and with goodwill." Then he's shot.
Makes sense.
Yeah, maybe in 1951. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe we would do the same thing in 2016 if it happened. Who knows?
Right. Well, Gort shows his power and his capability and just very easily pinpoints guns in soldiers' hands, a tank, some heavier artillery, and just makes it basically melt or vaporize. But Klaatu, says, "Hey, no, Gort, stop." And they take the alien Klaatu to Walter Reed Hospital, where, he's got a private room. Nice of him. I thought that was nice. He had a room within a room.
Yeah, he had a nice setup. The doors were locked, too.
That's true. The doctors are amazed. He heals in a day. And in the process, while he's there, the president's secretary, Mr. Harley, visits him, basically finding out, hey, why are you here? Klaatu tells him, "I need to speak to all the world's leaders." Well, Mr. Hurley pretty much does everything but laugh in his face of, yeah, this is, Cold War times. You're not going to get, different leaders from different countries to the same table. Doesn't matter if, you're an alien and it's unprecedented or not. He escapes. And he assumes the name John Carpenter.
I know. I thought that was kind of ironic too. Here's a sci-fi movie with a character taking the name of John Carpenter.
Yes. And as he's walking around, he goes to a boarding house, and so there's a family, right? There's a woman and her son. So Helen and Bobby. And Helen the next day has a day date with her man Tom, but she can't go because who's going to watch Bobby? Well, she's going to let the alien watch Bobby. Simpler times back then, I guess.
Oh, come on. She just thought he was from, France or something.
Right. Some other country where they speak perfect English. But so Bobby's taking him around Washington, D.C., showing him the sights. I really like the time they're in the Lincoln Memorial, and he's reading the plaque by.
That was that was good.
Yeah,
he's reading the Gettysburg Address.
Right, and he's like, I want to meet this guy. Well, a little too late. That was a really good moment in that movie. So Bobby's taking him around, and he ends up at Professor Barnhart. He's not there, but Klaatu breaks in, and he has his math problem on the chalkboard, and he solves it.
Yeah.
Kind of a calling card, I think. The professor comes back, he notices it, and Professor Barnhart sends his car, picks him up, and Klaatu's like, we need to, talk to the world leaders or talk to somebody. Explains that the people of other planets kind of have a safety concern about, our culture, our world, developing rockets and atomic power and concerned that we're not mature enough to handle it. They arrange to have a group of scientists together. You can tell your message to the group of scientists from around the world. So sure enough, Klaatu arranges for this demonstration. Don't really know what it is yet, but while we're waiting for the demonstration to happen, he visits Helen's work, and he telling her why he's there. While he's telling her, they're in an elevator and the power goes out. There's a blackout across the world, and
he arranged it.
And he arranged, but he made sure that didn't affect any of the planes in the air. Or anything critical that would hurt anybody.
Yeah, I think they said hospitals or emergency
hospitals,
services.
Right?
Yeah.
And that this demonstration is going to last 30 minutes. It gave him enough time to tell him everything she needed to know about why he was there. He also tells her that if anything happens to him, she has to go to Gort, the robot, and tell him, Klaatu Barada Niktu. He leaves her. He goes. Eventually goes back to his ship. Well, Bobby follows him. Sees that he's talking to Gort. And so he knows. Oh, he's the alien. He's a little worried. He tells Tom and his mom. And Tom tells the government. The government. Soldiers, they track him down while he's trying to escape, and they shoot him dead. Well, Helen goes to the robot as fast as she can, tells him the message, Klaatu Barada Niktu. Gort goes and picks up Klaatu, takes him in the ship. Helen goes in too and revives him.
At the time all these scientists were going to meet, and he rather dramatically walks out on top of the spaceship, and he says, "The universe grows smaller every day, and the threat of aggression by any group anywhere can no longer be tolerated. There must be security for all, or no one is secure. And this does not mean giving up any freedom, except the freedom to act irresponsibly. Your ancestors knew this when they made laws to govern themselves and hired policemen to enforce them. We of the other planets have long accepted this principle. We have an organization for the mutual protection of all planets and for the complete elimination of aggression. The test of any such higher authority is, of course, the police force that supports it. For our policemen, we created a race of robots. And then he goes on to say how the robots will pretty much kick anybody's ass who messes around. But he wraps up by saying, the result is we live in peace without arms or armies, secure in the knowledge that we are free from aggression and war, free to pursue more profitable enterprises. We do not pretend to have achieved perfection, but we do have a system, and it works. I came here to give you these facts. It is no concern of ours how you run your own planet, but if you threaten to extend your violence, this Earth of yours will be reduced to a burned-out cinder. Man, that is a hell of a speech.
Yeah, and that's how it ends.
And that's how the movie ends. He gets back in the ship, and he flies away. And that eerie music plays as you watch the spaceship fly away. You don't see any faces of humans after that. You don't hear anybody have any reaction to it. That's it. That's how it ends. Pretty freaky.
It is. It is. But, it's like, what was it, an hour and a half? There was an hour and 25 minutes of stuff, and then the message that needed to be delivered.
And it's a really strong message, too. And in fact, in the world we live in today, you could take this message to the Middle East, and you could deliver this message, and it would be a fair message to deliver. We've got a Navy, we've got an Army. We don't want to use it, but you know what? If you want to threaten us with your aggression, guess what? We're going to reduce you to a burned-out cinder. Ooh, geez. What do you think of that, ISIS?
Yeah.
This movie, as you mentioned earlier, was made in 1951 during the Cold War, and it was also a response to rising militarism in the United States. They didn't really. It is not a pro-military movie in any way, and obviously, I think that comes out a little bit in that. In that speech. The actor who played Klaatu, his name is Michael Rennie. It's interesting because he's got another sci-fi starring or guest starring role that kids growing up in the 70s might know. He played the role of the Keeper on a 2-part episode of Lost in Space.
Yeah.
And, he has that, he's so English, so British, and the way he speaks is so distinct, and the timbre of his voice is so distinct that you can't help but remember that who this guy is. He is a strong presence on film.
He sure is.
He sure is. When I first saw this movie years ago, I remembered, oh my God, that's the Keeper from Lost in Space. You remember his presence right away. He was hired because American audiences didn't know him. Prior to him being hired, if you can imagine this, the role was offered to Spencer Tracy. And Spencer Tracy kind of was into it, thinking, wow, this might be a cool role for me. But then they decided, you know what? As soon as that spaceship opens and he would walk out, the entire audience would go, oh, hey, look, it's Spencer Tracy. And then that would be, the end of the story.
Right.
Patricia
take away from the message, right?
That's right, big time. Patricia Neal plays Helen in this movie also. This was her 9th film. And she's best known for her roles in movies like Breakfast at Tiffany's, HUD, and In Harm's Way with John Wayne. But for kids, again, growing up in the 70s, they might remember this role. She played the mom in a movie called Homecoming, A Christmas Story. The name of the character she played was Olivia Walton. And that movie was the pilot for what would come later, the series The Waltons. And, of course, her role as Olivia was recast, and Michael Leonard took that job. But that's a movie, that we have on DVD, and our family watches that every year.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good one. And there's another actress in this movie that kids growing up in the 70s will know. If you watched reruns of the Andy Griffith Show, you'll instantly recognize Aunt Bee Frances Bavier played Mrs. Barley. She's one of the tenants at the boarding house. And you can clearly, as soon as she begins to speak, you're like, oh my God, that's Aunt B.
It's Aunt B.
It's Aunt B.
Aunt B in the city.
Aunt B in the city. Yes, I like that. The film is directed by Robert Wise, who, of course, goes on to direct Star Trek the Motion Picture in 1979. At the time, this was his 14th movie, and he would go on to make a total of 41 films as director. He has another interesting credit. In 1936, he was the editor of Citizen Kane, which, of course, is thought to be one of the greatest movies ever made. Yeah, he edited Citizen Kane.
Wow, I didn't see that in my research.
How about that one? Bobby likes it when he surprises Kelly. The role of Gort was played by a man named Locke Martin. He's not an actor. He was the doorman at Grauman's Chinese Theater.
Right.
And he was hired because he's really tall. He's really tall. He was a very tall man. But what's interesting is he was tall, but not very physically strong. And in fact, is described as weak. He could not carry Patricia Neal in the scenes where you see Gort carrying her. And in fact, there were lines attached to Patricia Neal. And, Martin just sort of held his arms out and walked underneath of her. He had a hard time because of his lack of strength wearing the very heavy Gort suit. And he could only stay in it for a short period of time. And during the final scene where Klaatu gives that big speech, Martin is in the background in the Gort costume, and he's having such a hard time. His arm began to twitch.
Oh, no.
And if you look at the scene and look at Gort, you can see his arm move a little bit. I thought this was interesting. There were two Gort suits.
Yeah.
One that laced up the front for shots from behind the robot, and one that laced down the back for shots in front of the robot. Well, that actually makes a lot of sense once you think about it. Yeah. Patricia Neal has said in interviews that she was completely unaware while they were making this movie that it would turn out so well and it would become a classic. And she assumed it was going to be one of those silly flying saucer movies that were kind of popular in the 50s that were being made, and actually had a hard time keeping a straight face during some of the lines. Probably specifically Klaatu Barada Nikto. She probably had a hard time
Probably
keeping a straight face saying that. I mean, come on. Who wouldn't?
Right. Well, even back then, how often did anybody speak an alien language?
Yeah, right. No, it was always English. You'd see green guys speaking English and things like that.
Right.
The music in this movie, obviously very odd, very strange, and that's what Wise was going for. It was conducted, written, and scored by Bernard Herrmann, and he used two theremins to create this creepy score. The theremin is an electronic instrument, one of the very, very first electronic instruments. One of those theremins created a higher pitched musical tone, and the other made a very lower pitched. And so they used those back and forth. And this music and pieces of this music were used, here we go again, in the Lost in Space pilot. So another connection with Lost in Space. Those connections might be sort of understandable because 20th Century Fox made both the movie and the show.
Well, and they used it in Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea too, didn't they?
Now that I don't know. They might have. I didn't check on that.
Irwin Allen did both.
Well, you're right, and so that would make sense that he might have. You're right. George Lucas loved this movie and named two of his alien bounty hunters in the Star Wars trilogy. One was named Klaatu, and one was named Barada Nikto. So George Lucas loved The Day the Earth Stood Still. To increase the sense of reality, some of the most famous broadcast journalists of the day of 1951 were hired to do cameos. So those guys that you see doing radio and doing TV, they're actually journalists. And they include Gabriel Heater, H.V. Kaltenborn, and Drew Pearson. And those are big names for anybody who is a journalist today or understands journalism history. I thought that Wise did a really good job here, making this film feel real. Don't you think?
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
If you look,
especially for the time. I mean,
yes. Go ahead.
No, not much more. It felt like you were in the 50s, which you were back then. And outside of some of the shots definitely being on a film stage, it definitely felt like it was real.
And the majority of the movie takes place in Washington, D.C., and you have the alien character who doesn't look alien walking around the streets of a modern city at that time. Think about that for a minute. There's an alien walking around an American city. Up till that point, sci-fi movies had alien-looking aliens flying around in crazy spaceships or on crazy worlds that didn't look like Earth. So the fact, that suddenly takes this movie to a whole new level. We're playing in a whole different sandbox here with this film. It's much more serious. It's much more realistic. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, most of the movie, too, wasn't in a sci-fi setting at all.
No. Right,
so
exactly.
Just the saucer scenes when they go in the saucer, and that's pretty much it.
I thought there was some interesting emotion at the beginning of the movie. You talk about the president's representative talking with Klaatu at the hospital. And Klaatu keeps saying, I want to meet with world leaders. You can't. Well, let's get everybody together. Well, we really can't. So at one point you look at him and you can see he's kind of let down by the fact that this can't happen in 1951 America and in 1951 the world we live in. We can't get over ourselves to even come together and hear, for the first time, a visitor from another world speak to us. And you can see it in his face.
Yeah.
And I thought that's a real nice piece of realism, too, because that kind of stuff you didn't see in 1950s sci-fi movies. It's ranked 8th as the 8th best sci-fi movie of all time, which still, from 1951, the fact that it's in the top 10, I think that says a whole lot about how important and how big this movie was. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think that it shows that you don't need the big old special effects to have a good sci-fi movie.
Yes, absolutely. And just to sort of turn a corner for a moment and leave this movie behind just for a second, if you look at Star Trek in the 1960s, it's almost the same idea. It's the story that's front and center. That's the focus. And when we left the story behind and focused on the special effects, what did we get? Star Trek the Motion Picture. And I don't mean to knock it. I do love Star Trek the Motion Picture for its own things, but let's face it, it's not the strongest film because it's not the strongest story, or the storytelling isn't the strongest. There are all these long shots of the ship flying and V'ger flying and all these, special effects. Leonard Nimoy himself has said, I couldn't find Spock in the story. I couldn't find the motivation because it was all special effects. So I think you nailed it. That's why this movie works so well. It's not an attempt to wow you. It's an attempt to get you to think. And that's what Gene Roddenberry, I think, responded to. I think when he saw this movie and began to think about things that he wanted to do using science fiction, I think this was always in the back of his mind as a template.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, just the way look how this movie was set up. It was a lot of build up, and then basically a morality lesson at the end.
Yeah. Yes.
And we saw a lot of that in Star Trek.
Yes. Let's talk about parallels to Star Trek for a second. Klaatu is part of a vast interstellar alliance. Sounds like the Federation.
Yep.
A fleet of peacekeeping ships. Again, sounds like Starfleet. They don't care how we run our world. A little bit of the prime directive there. We're not going to interfere. We don't care what you do. What you do is your business. But then on the other side of that coin is, but don't screw with us or our friends. That's kind of the Federation.
Yeah.
Maybe not so overt, maybe not so strongly put as Klaatu put it. You know, you don't hear Kirk saying we're going to burn you to a cinder if you start screwing with us.
Yep.
But that's the same idea. We're also here to defend the Federation, so don't mess with us. Did you find any other parallels?
Yeah, so this was a first contact situation.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
How many first contact situations did we see in Star Trek?
Right.
It's hey, you got the technology now. We're going to contact you because you're ready to be contacted. In this case, it's like, but don't screw with us because you'll die. But it was, classic first contact.
What's interesting here, too, is that this is a first contact situation that goes wrong, which is why Kirk and everybody in the Federation and in Starfleet later on have rules for first contact situations. So they don't go wrong.
Right.
So there you go. The Day the Earth Stood Still, yes, it remains really thoughtful science fiction. And I think it's pretty clear why Roddenberry appreciated this film. Kelly, final thoughts?
Oh,
okay,
no.
Well, that was strong. I'm really happy you were here with us this week. Thank you so much. Next week, we reminisce about one of our favorite parts of Star Trek in the 1970s. Oh, man, the AMT model kits. I can't wait.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.